if you're following tech space, you're probably wondering, how does one company, Anthropic, able to grow from 9 billion to 30 billion just in 6 months? And I suspect they do that through very good existing customer expansion motions and being able to retain their existing customer base. Now, from my personal experience, I can tell you that for the first time in my professional life and in my personal life, I am thinking of solution, not in terms of how much I'm spending on it, but more of how much of my cognitive abilities are being offloaded into the solution. So how much of my, personal brain power and my company's brain power is actually sitting in this one provider. And that tells me that because I'm looking at it through that lens, that is something super sticky in that product. And what are the tactics they're using that they make it super sticky? One is when it comes to revenue expansion. So they do revenue expansion, what I call integration, free integration, but then expanding their billable surface. So they're integrating with Salesforce, with Microsoft solutions, they're integrating with Slack. And through those integrations, they're able to expand the surface of the usage of their platform, of their solution, and obviously charge the consumption for that solution. So, in the classic, what everybody wants thinking, right? Okay, what's happening with systems of engagement and systems of record? And everybody wants to become all of a sudden like the system of control. And so Claude, or Anthropic, with their Claude solution, very smartly have been able to solve that and become this system of control in most of the cases. Now, we don't know whether this tactic is going to work long time, but for sure it's working right now. Eventually, they will have to determine what is their strategy. Are they the infrastructure provider upon which the software applications are built on, or are they actually going to be, the software provider themselves? Every infrastructure company at some point in their history had to kind of wrestle with that decision, and most of them made the decision to become an infrastructure companies and not necessarily compete with the software providers. So think of like Microsoft. The only exception is probably like Salesforce and maybe to extend Workday, and those solutions I suspect are not built on Azure. But nevertheless, right, you have to make a decision. For Anthropic, it will be a very difficult decision because they are not necessarily in the business of building data centers, because that's what it will take you to become a true infrastructure provider. So nevertheless, in the meantime, they're expanding through these integrations and increasing the billable surface. Another tactic that they deploy is through their pricing mechanisms. So Anthropic is probably the only software, the only solution I've seen out there where it has pricing ranges like in a 20x range. So their cheapest model is at about 25 cents. Haiku is 25 cents, blanking on how many tokens. So let's say 1,000 tokens. Well, for Opus, which is their newer model, it is like $30, let's say, per 1,000 tokens. Now that is somewhere in a range of 20x. And how are they able to move users from these like lower tier to a higher tier? It's really through aligning to the end user's workflow very seamlessly. So I'll give you an example, right? So when I first started, I used Haiku, and then as I'm building a prototype, it kind of works, it's fine, it's like easy, I don't need much bandwidth, I don't need that speed, it's not super complicated. But as the product and the prototype matures, you really, you start running into memory issues, capacity issues, and you're like, I don't want to deal with that, it's taking too long. Right now, I'm like, I gotta move faster. And the minute you have to move faster, you actually have to upgrade to Opus. And so when I upgrade it, it doesn't feel as painful because, well, I am also building something a bit more mature, right? So logically, it kind of makes sense. So what they do is they actually increase the prices through the architecture, not through kind of like, pricing discussion. And it's like a very not a unique way, but a intelligent way to deploy this kind of pull strategy where I get pulled into their solution. Nobody's actually pushing that solution upon me. I can always easily walk away and make a decision not to upgrade. But when it's so closely integrated into your workflows, it's it would take way much more effort and cost for me to move away into some different new solution than it's actually just go ahead and upgrade into higher tier model. So the kind of the lesson learned from there is that really figure out how do you embed your solution and build the architecture to deploy this pull strategy, not a push strategy. Nobody wants to talk to salespeople anymore. So that's one. Another kind of very smart pricing decision that they made was, and maybe some of you experienced as well, where it's like, well, I bought a seat, but then eventually it became seat plus consumption. And all of a sudden I'm receiving all these notifications of, my Anthropic consumption. And I didn't follow much about their pricing. I didn't know that until it actually started happening. But did I go back and cancel, my subscriptions or my seats? No, I still continue using my seats. It's just now that I'm getting an additional upcharge based on my consumption. And yet again, that's a super clever way to upcharge your customers. Then lastly, I think one of the things that a lot of software companies, especially more in the ones that are more traditional, and maybe even some folks who haven't even migrated to the cloud or, still in the kind of live in the old architectures, don't think about it, is the fact that like a revenue assurance, so like the point of collecting revenue from your existing customer base, because let's be honest, right? You might retain these customers, but if you're not collecting the bills from those customers accurately, A, you're having a cash flow issue, and B, you're really upsetting your existing customer base because you come across as unprofessional and difficult to do business with. So Anthropic cleverly uses the billing infrastructure behind all of these models and all of their solutions, as they're treating it as a go-to-market motion. It's not some back office thing that they do. No, it's front and center. It is very visible to the end user. It's easy to understand. So it is a GTM, like go-to-market infrastructure, not a simple billing infrastructure. And a lot of, if you look at like hyperscalers and a lot of these more sophisticated pricing model companies, they deploy very similar tactics in terms of how they treat their billing infrastructure. And the last is like, okay, well, in order to retain customers, you really have to manage churn, right? So if you're traditional software, you're thinking about, the churn management in terms of like, lower usage, but also, customer completely canceling subscription. Well, Anthropic doesn't have to deal with that. Like if you look at their whom are they hiring? And that's one indicator in terms of, are they really concerned about the churn? They're not hiring like your typical, what do we call like customer success / support folks. They're hiring people in those roles that are, in the like 300K ranges of the salary, which is an indicator that they're probably going to focus more on kind of upcharge, like driving additional revenue for Anthropic, not necessarily trying to just manage the churn. So really what I'm trying to say is that Anthropic does not care about churn at this point in their life cycle, and rightfully so, right? They're growing fast. They don't have to worry about that just yet. So if you are more traditional, you don't really have, that is the infrastructure you need to build out to make sure you manage that churn. So not the tactic that to deploy, but just summarize, right? If you're thinking, okay, how do I think about, my products, and how do I expand my existing products or new AI enabled products to my existing customer base? So really the 3 takeaways is make sure the way you integrate with all other solutions, and the more agentic you become, the more integrations you'll be just exposing your APIs, that you're the control plane. You're sitting at the top of all these other integrations. So really think smartly about how you're integrating in a way that increases your billable surface. So that's one. And then number 2, the pricing tactics, right? So think of a pricing increase as your architectural decisions. The price increases no longer just can sit with your finance team making a decision. It really has to be like engineering conversation, and those two have to, sit in the desk, sit in the same room and make those decisions together. You cannot decouple infrastructure or your architecture from your pricing conversations and decisions as a company. So I'd say those 2 key takeaways. Let me know what you think. Thanks.